According to Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharishi, how to control the mind, Maharishi said, mind is intangible. In fact, it doesn't exist. The surest way of control is to seek it. Then its activities cease. Seek the mind on being sought, it will disappear. The mind is only a bundle of thoughts. The thoughts arise because there is the thinker. The thinker is the ego. The ego, if sought, will vanish automatically. The ego and the mind are the same. The ego is the root thought from which all other thoughts arise. Dive within. You are now aware that the mind rises from within, so sink within and seek. You did not eliminate the wrong I. How can I eliminate itself? All that you need do is to find out its origin and abide there. Your efforts can extend only thus far, then the beyond will take care of itself. You are helpless there. No effort can reach it. The individual cannot exist without the self, but the self can exist without the individual. Our analyses are ended, that is, so far as the intellect goes, but they are not enough. Eliminating the not I is not enough. The process is only intellectual. The truth cannot be directly pointed out, hence the process. Now begin the real inner quest. The I thought is the root now to be sought at its source. Find out who it is and abide there. Devotee asked, is the analytic process merely intellectual or does it exhibit feeling predominantly? Maharishi said the personal I is a reflection of the real self in the mind. Ask yourself the question, who am I? The body and its function are not I. Inquire further. The senses and their functions are not I. Going deeper, the mind and its functions are not I. The next step is the question, whence do these thoughts arise? Thoughts are spontaneous, superficial, or analytical. Who is aware of them? Their existence and operations become evident to the individual. Analysis leads to the conclusion that individuality is operative as the awareness of existence of the thoughts. This is ego. Inquire further. Who is this I and whence do sleep analysis? I am underlies the three states sleep, waking, and dream. After discarding all not self, we find the residue, the self absolute. Both the world and ego are objective and must be eliminated in the analysis. Eliminating the unreal, the real survives. To accomplish this, eliminate the mind, which is the creator of the dualistic idea and of ego. Mind is one form of life manifestation. Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharishi's views on salvation. Devotee asked, is this method quicker than developing qualities thought to be necessary for salvation? Maharishi said, all bad qualities are tied round the ego. When the ego is gone, realization is self evident. There are neither good nor bad qualities in the self. Self is free from all qualities. Qualities pertain to the mind only. The enquiry should be where the I is. After the rise of the I thought, there is false identification of the I with the body, the senses, mind, etc. Self is wrongly associated with them. The true self is lost sight of. In order to shift the pure I from the contaminated I, this discarding of the sheaths mentioned in the Shastras, scriptures is mentioned, but it means not exactly discarding of the non self, but the finding of the real self. The real self is the infinite I in perfection. It is eternal. It has no origin and no end. The other I is born and dies. It is impermanent. See to whom the changing thoughts occur. They will be found to arise after the I thought. Hold the I thought, they subside. Trace the source of the I thought, the self alone remains. The root of thoughts is ego, ahankara. To say, I am not the body, but I am the self, is still not correct. There is no thought of I in true being. Let us discover if all thoughts can be traced to someone thought as their base of operations. Do you not see that the thought or idea I, the idea of personality, is such a root thought? The personality, antakarna, is a medium. It is what we call sukshmana sharira, subtle body, which acts as a medium between the body and the self. It can turn to the body or to the self, merging itself in either. The I thought is not pure, it is contaminated with association with the body and senses. See to whom the trouble is. It is the I thought, hold it, then the other thoughts will cease. Devotee asked, Yes, but how to do it? That is the whole trouble. Maharishi said, Think I, and hold to that one thought to the exclusion of all others. Sri Ramana Maharishi's views on self surrender. Devotee asked, What is self surrender? Maharishi said, It is the same as self control. Control is affected by the removal of sanskaras. The ego submits only when it recognizes the higher power. Such recognition is surrender, submission to it is self control. Otherwise, the ego remains stuck up like the image carved on a tar, making it appear by its strained look that it is supporting the tar on its shoulders. The ego cannot exist without the higher power, but thinks that it acts of its own accord. A passenger in a railway train keeps his load on the head by his fully folly. Let him drop it down, he will find the load reaching his destination all the same. Similarly, let us not pose as the doers, but resign ourselves to the guiding power. Desire of sleep or fear of death exists when the mind is active and not in the respective states themselves. The mind knows that the body entity persists and reappears after sleep. Therefore, sleep is not attended with fear but with the pleasure of a non body. No existence is sought. On the other hand, the mind is not sure of reappearance after so called death and therefore dreads it. The ego has its source from the self and is not separate from it. Hence, the ego must only be retraced in order that it might merge in its source. The core of the ego is called the heart. Bhagwan Sri Ramnas Maharishi views on death. Devotee asked, What is death? Is it not the fall of body? Maharishi said, Do you not desire it in sleep? What goes wrong then? Devotee asked, But I know I shall wake up. Maharishi said, Yes, a thought again. There is the preceding thought, I shall wake up. Thoughts rule the life. Freedom from thoughts is one's true nature, bliss. Death is a thought and nothing else. He who thinks raises troubles. Let the thinker say what happened to him in death. The real I is silent. One should not think, I am this, I am not that. To say this or that is wrong. They are also limitations. I am alone is true. Silence is I. Devotee asked, if a person whom we love dies, grief results. Shall we avoid such grief by either loving all alike or by not loving at all? Maharishi said, if one dies, there is grief for the other who lives. The way to get rid of grief is not to live. Kill the one who grieves. Who will then remain to suffer? The ego must die. That is the only way. The two alternatives amounts to the same state. When all is the self, who is there to be loved or hated? There is a class of people who want to know all about their future and past births. They ignore the present. The Lord from the past is the present misery. Why recall the past? It is a waste of time. The self is the electricity dynamo, the mind is the contact switch, board, while the body is the lamp. When the karma hour comes to give death, the mind switches off the current and withdraws the light life from the body. Both mind and vitality are manifestations of the supreme life force, the self. Devotee asked, can the yogis show the dead to us? Maharishi said, they may, but do not ask me to show them, for I cannot. Did we know our relatives before their births, that we should know them after their deaths? Devotee asked, what happens to a man after death? Maharishi said, engage yourself in the living present. The future will take care of itself. Do not worry about the future. The state before creation and the process of creation are dealt with in the scriptures in order that you may know the present. Because you say you are born, therefore they say it. What is birth? Is it of the I thought or of the body? Is I separate from the body or identical? How did this I thought arise? Is the I thought your nature, or is anything else your nature? The Jnanis I include but doesn't identify himself with the body, for there cannot be anything apart from I for him. If the body falls, there is no loss for the I remains the same. If the body feels dead, let it raise the question. Being inert, it cannot. I never dies and doesn't ask. Who then dies? Who asks? Devotee asked, do you see the dead? Maharishi said, yes, in dreams. Devotee asked, where from does the ego rise? Maharishi said, soul, mind, ego are mere words. There are no true entities of the kind. Consciousness is the only truth. Forgetfulness of your real nature is the real death. Remembrance of it is the true birth. It puts an end to successive births. Yours is then eternal life. How does the desire for eternal life arise? Because the present state is unbearable. Why? Because it is not your true nature. Had it been your real nature, there would be no desire to agitate you. How does the present state differ from your real nature? You are spirit in truth. Man considers himself limited. There arises the trouble. The idea is wrong. In sleep, there was no world, no ego, and no trouble. Something wakes up from that happy state and says, I. To that ego, the world appears. It is the rise of the ego that is the cause of the trouble. Let him trace the ego to its source. and he will reach that undifferentiated, happy source, a state which is sleepless sleep. The self is ever there, wisdom only appears to dawn, though it is natural. Devotee asked, are ego and the self the same? Maharishi said, self can be without the ego, but the ego cannot be without the self. Egos are like bubbles in the ocean. Impurities and worldly attachments affect only the ego. The self remains pure and unaffected. All these are only mental concepts. You are now identifying yourself with a wrong I, which is the I thought. This I thought rises and sinks, whereas the true significance of I cannot do so. There cannot be a break in your being. The father of your personal I is the real I, God. Try to find out the source of the individual I, and then you will reach the other I. When the individual goes, the desires also go. Once a devotee asked Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharishi, once I was very self reliant. I now fear in old age. People laugh at me. Maharishi said, even when you said you were self reliant, it was not so. You were ego reliant. In place of that, if you let ego go, you will get real self reliance. Your pride was merely pride of ego. So long as you identify yourself with the ego, then you will recognize others as individuals too. Then there is room for pride. Let that drop, and you drop others' ego too. And so there is no more room for pride. So long as there is the sense of separation, there will be afflicting thoughts. If the original source is regained and the sense of separation is ended, there is peace. Consider what happens when a stone is thrown up. It leaves its source, is propelled up, tries to come down, and is always in motion until it regains its source when it is at rest. So also the waters of the ocean evaporates from clouds which are moved by winds, condense into water and fall as rain, and the waters roll down the hilltops in streams and rivers until they reach their original source, the ocean reaching which they are at peace. Thus you see, where there is a sense of separateness from the source, there is agitation and movement until the sense of separateness is lost. So it is with yourself. Now that you identify yourself with the body, you think that you are separate. You must regain your source before this false identity ceases and you are happy. Gold is not an ornament, but the ornament is nothing but gold. Whatever shapes the ornament may assume, and however different the shapes of the ornaments are, there is only one reality, that is gold. So also with the bodies and the self. The reality is the self. To identify oneself with the body and yet to seek happiness is like attempting to ford a lake on the back of an alligator. The body identity is due to extroversion and the wandering of the mind. To continue in that state will only keep one in an endless tangle, and there will be no peace. Seek your source, merge in the self, and remain all one. Rebirth really means discontent with the present state and desire to be born where there will be no discontent. Birds, being the body, cannot affect the self. The self remains ever. Even after the body perishes, the discontent is due to the wrong identity of the eternal self with the imperishable body. The body is the necessary adjunct of the ego. If the ego is killed, the eternal self is revealed in all its glory. The body is the cross. Jesus, the Son of Man, is the ego, or I am the body idea. When he is crucified, he is resurrected, a glorious self, Jesus, the Son of God. Give up this life if thou wouldest live. Ajnani crushes the ego at its center. It rises up again and again for him too. As for the ignorant, impelled by nature, that is prarabdha, both in the ignorant and the jnani, ego sprouts up. But with this difference, the former's ego, when it rises up, is quiet, ignorant of its source, or is not aware of it in deep sleep, in the dream and wakeful states, whereas a jnani, when his ego rises up, enjoys his transcendental experience with this ego, keeping his lakshya vision always on its source. His ego is not dangerous, it is only the ash skeleton of a burnt robe. Although it possesses a form, it is ineffective. By constantly keeping our lakshya on our source, our ego is dissolved. Sri Ramnas Maharishi's views on self realization. Devotee asked, how is realization made possible? Maharishi said, there is the absolute self from which a spark proceeds as from fire. The spark is called ego. In the case of the ignorant, it identifies itself with the some object simultaneously with its rise. It cannot remain independent of such association. This association is ignorance, whose destruction is the object of our efforts. If ego's objectifying tendency is killed, it remains pure and also merges in its source. We can separate ourselves from that which is external, but not from that which is one with us. Hence, ego is not one with body. This must be realized in the waking state. The quest, who am I, is the X to cut off the ego. The intellect always seeks to have external knowledge, leaving knowledge of its own origin. The mind is only identity of the self with the body. It is a false ego that is created. It creates false phenomena in its turn and appears to move in them. If the false identity vanishes, the reality becomes apparent. This doesn't mean that reality is not now. It is always there and eternally the same. The mind rises after the rise of I thought or the ego. Devotee asked, how to get rid of egoism? Maharishi said, if you see what the ego really is, that is enough to get rid of it. It is the ego itself which makes efforts to get rid of itself. So, how can it die? If ego is to go, then something else must slay it. Will it ever consent to commit suicide? So, first realize what is the true nature of the ego, and it will go of its own accord. Examine the nature of the ego. That is the process of realization. If one sees what one's real nature is, then one will get rid of ego. Until then, our efforts are just like chasing one's own shadow. The more one advances, the more distant is the shadow. If we leave our own self, then the ego will manifest itself. If we seek our true nature, then ego dies. If we are in our own reality, then we need not trouble about the ego. Seek your source, find out whence the thought I springs, What object can we be surer of and no more certainly than ourselves? This is direct experience and cannot further be described. If the present I goes it, the mind is known for what it is, a myth. What remains over is the pure self. In deep sleep, the self exists without perception of body and world, then happiness reigns. Panchri Ramana Maharishi's views on divine center inside. Devotee asked, "You say that we shall find the divine center inside us. If each individual has a center, are there then millions of divine centers?" Maharishi said, "There is only one center to which there is no circumference. Dive deep within and find it. Meditating on Him or on the seer, the self, there is a mental vibration I to which all are reduced, tracing the source of I, the primal I alone remains over, and it is inexpressible." Devotee asks, "Is there not an unchanging self and the changing self?" Maharishi said, "The changefulness is mere thought. All thoughts arise after the arising of the I thought. See the whom these thoughts arise, then you transcend them and they subside. That is to say, tracing the source of the I thought, you realize the perfect I. I. I is the name of the self." Devotee asked, "Do memory, sleep, and death affect the I?" Maharishi said, "It is confusion due to non differentiation between false and real I. These three attributes and modes pertain to the self, false ego." Vivek Chudamani makes it clear that the artificial I of the Vijan Maya Kosh is a projection, and through it one must look to the true principle of I. Devotee asked, "What is the ego self?" Maharishi said, "The ego appears and disappears. It is transitory, whereas the real self abides permanently." Devotee asked, "What is prostrating?" Maharishi said, "It means subsidence of ego. What is subsidence? To merge into the source. God cannot be deceived by outward genuflections and bowings. He sees if the ego is there or not. I am is the ocean, and the individual egos are bubbles in it. Bubbles pass away." Devotee are what of evil conditions, birth and deaths, for instance? Maharishi said, "First the ego comes in, it's spouting as our birth, but really we do not die. It is wrong to say we see, for if you try to find out who sees, that seer disappears. I is the subject, and all other thoughts comprise the object, the mind." "Were you aware when you were fast asleep last night?" "No." "What is it that now exists and troubles you?" "It is the I. Get rid of it and be happy." The ego ridden mind has its strength sapped and is too weak to resist the torturing thoughts. The egoless mind is happy in deep, dreamless sleep. Clearly, therefore, bliss and misery are only modes of mind, but the weak mode is not easily interchangeable with the strong mode. Activity is weakness and consequently miserable. Passivity is strength and therefore blissful. The dormant strength is not apparent and therefore not availed of. Creation is to be considered in two aspects, creator and individual soul. It is the latter which causes pain and pleasure, irrespective of former. Pain and pleasure has no reference to fact but to mental conceptions. Kill the personality, and there is no pain or pleasure but the natural bliss which persists eternally. Conscious death is the purpose of evolution, and conscious immortality whilst still in the flesh. And Sri Ramana Maharishi views on how to know the self. Maharishi said, "See what the self is. What you consider as the self is really either the mind, intellect, or the I thought, so hold on to it. The others will vanish, leaving the self. Are there two eyes? How do you know your existence? Do you see yourself with these eyes? Question yourself. How does this question arise? Do I remain to ask it or not? Can I find myself as in a mirror? Because your outlook has been outward bent, it has lost sight of the self, and your vision is external. The self is not found in the external objects. Turn your look within and plunge down. You will be the self. Devotee asked, "What is to be done to kill the ego?" Maharishi said, "See for whom the doubts are. Who is the doubter? Who is the thinker? That is the ego. Hold it. The other thoughts will die away. The ego is pure. See where from the ego arises. That is pure consciousness." Devotee asked, "I begin to ask myself, who am I? Eliminate the body as not I, the prana as not I, the mind as not I, and I am not able to proceed further." Maharishi said, "Well, that is so far as the intellect goes. Your process is only intellectual. Indeed, all the scriptures mention the process only to guide the seeker to know the truth. The truth cannot be directly pointed out, hence this intellectual process. You see, the one who eliminates all the not I, cannot eliminate the I to say I am not this or I am that. There must be the I. This I is only the ego or the I thought. After the rising up of this I thought, all other thoughts arise. The I thought is therefore the root thought. If the root is eliminated, all other are uprooted. Therefore, seek the root I, question yourself, who am I? Find out its source, then all these will vanish and the pure self will remain over. The I is always there in Sushupti, deep sleep, in dream and in wakefulness. The one in sleep is the same as the one who now speaks. There is always the feeling of I. Do you deny your existence? Do not say I am as if to convince yourself of your existence. Find out who is. The reality of yourself cannot be questioned. The self is the primal reality. The ordinary man takes as reality unconsciously his true inner reality plus all things which have come into his consciousness as pertaining to himself, body, etc. He has to unlearn. Devotee, is it possible to know the after death state of a person? Maharishi said, "It is possible, but why try to know it?" Devotee asked, "Because I consider my own son's death to be real from my level of understanding." Maharishi said, "The birth of the I thought is one's son's birth. Its death is the person's death. After the I thought has arisen, the wrong identity with the body arises. Thinking yourself as the body, you give false values to others and identity them with bodies. Did you think of your son before his birth only as you are thinking of him? He is your son. Where has he gone? He has gone to the source from which he sprang. He is one with you. So long as you are, He is there too. See the real self, and this confusion with body will vanish. You are eternal, the others will be found to be eternal. Until this truth is realized, there will be always this grief due to wrong identity. Birth and death and rebirth should only make you investigate the question and find out that there are no births or rebirths. They relate to the body and not to the self. Devotee asked, what happens to the created ego after body dies? Maharishi said, ego is I thought in its subtle form. It remains a thought, whereas in its gross aspect it embraces mind, senses, and body. They disappear in deep slumber along with the ego. Still, the self is there. Similarly, it will be in death. Ego is not an entity independent of the self in order that it might be created or destroyed by itself. It functions as an instrument of the self and periodically ceases to function. That is, it appears and disappears as birth and death. Devotee asked, I want to find the real I and always be effortlessly in touch. Maharishi said, it is enough that you give up the individual I and no effort will be needed to gain the real I. Do not think that there is any such difference between you and the self. Then surrender yourself to Him, merge yourself in Him. There should be no reservations, as you cannot cheat God. Devotee asked, what about after death? Maharishi said, inquire first who or what is it that is born. It is the body, not you. Why trouble about things beyond you, like death, when yourself is here and present? Devotee asked, how long does one stay in other worlds between births and deaths, reincarnation? Maharishi said, the sense of time is relative. In a dream, you may live a whole day's event in a couple of hours. In the subtle body of the death world, you may do the same and live what seems 1,000 years, although by our time it may be only 100 years. When news of someone's death was reported to Maharishi, he replied, good, the dead ones are indeed happy. They have got rid of the troublesome overgrowth, the body. Do men fear sleep? Sleep is temporary death, death is longer sleep. Why should one desire continuance of the bodily shackles? Let the man find out his undying self and be immortal. So long as one identifies himself with his gross body, the thoughts materialized as gross manifestations must be real to him. Having existed here, it certainly survives death. Hence, under these circumstances, the other world exists. On the other hand, consider that the one reality is the self from whom has sprung the ego. The ego loses sight of the self and identifies itself with body, with the result of ignorance and misery. The life current has passed through innumerable incarnations, births, and deaths, but is still unaffected. There is no reason to mourn. The mind is of the ego, and the ego rises from the self. Nandi, the sacred bull of Shiva, represents the ego Jiva. It is always shown in our temples facing the god and with the flat circular stone in front of it. This stone altar is where sacrifices are offered, and it all symbolizes that the ego must be sacrificed and must always be turned towards the inner God. Know what the Jiva is. What is the difference between Jiva and Atma? Is Jiva itself Atma, or is there any separate thing as Atma? Devotee, what is the object of one's life? Maharishi said the object is to understand who is that I contained in your Maya. Devotee asked, I realized that intellectually I am part of the great I, the universe. Maharishi said, then there are two eyes. Realize that you are not part but the whole. Maharishi's devotee asked from Maharishi, what is the reason for this apparent duality of selves which exist? Maharishi said, in your sound sleep, do you think of duality, part or whole? Duality is only when you awake. What became of the world when you were asleep? Then I existed in all three states, and it is that which you want to know. The thoughts of life's purpose or purposelessness do not arise to trouble you during sleep. In the Yoga Vasishtha, Chudala, the wife of Sikidwaja, teaches her husband the principles of Advaita Vedanta. Hear from me another story which will be of great help to you in the improvement of your knowledge. In the ancient forest, there lived an elephant, the hugest and loftiest of his kind. Certain Mahots of the forest associated with and entrapped this elephant, whose tusks were exceedingly long, sharp, and strong, and fettered it with strong iron chains. The elephant was made to go through all kinds of torture and hardships by the Mahout. Becoming infuriated with its painful fetters, it shook itself free by the aid of powerful tusks. The Mahout in the Howdah above, seeing this, became giddy and fell to the ground. The tusker, finding him upon the ground, passed by without hurting him. But the driver, picking himself up with unappeased passion, went again in quest of the elephant, which he found in the midst of the forest. There he dug a trench, covering it up and dry leaves and grass. The elephant, after roaming through the forest, came at length to the place where the trench was, and fell into it. Instantly the Mahout made it fast. Thus again was the elephant subjected to torture. Had this creature killed his enemy at the time when the Mahout lay before it, it would not again have fallen into the trap, nor have been thus again agitated. Likewise, those who make no enquiry concerning the good and evil of the future will come to grief. Chudala illustrated Sikdwaja's error by this story. He had Vairagya even while ruling his kingdom, and could have realized the self if only he had pushed his Vairagya to the point of the sacrifice of the ego. He did not do so, but went to the forest, had a time table of tapas, and yet did not improve even after 18 years of effort. He had made himself a victim of his own creation. Chudala now advised him to give up the ego and realize the self, which he did and was emancipated. It is clear from Chudala's story that Vairagya, still accompanied by the ego, is of no value, whereas having possessions but free from the tangle of the ego is liberation. Hari Om Tat Sat.